Good morning, everybody. It's 9:01 a.m. on August 24th, 2023, and we'll call this meeting of the Board of Directors for the Animal Service Center of the Mesilla Valley to order. If we can rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If we can get a roll call, please.
Board Member De Leon.
Here.
Board Member Ward.
Present.
Board Member Flores.
Oh, I'm here.
She's here. Board Member Macias.
Present.
Board Member Coran.
Present.
Board Member Shayla Hernandez is absent. Board Member Gandara is absent. Chair Sanchez,
Present.
you have a quorum.
Thank you. All right. Are there, I'll look at Mr. Thacker. Is there any changes to the agenda that we're aware of? I see a shaking head, so we'll say no. So if I can get a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve. Corin.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Councilor Corn and a second by County Manager Macias. Are there any input or is any input on the agenda? Not hearing or seeing any, then we'll call for a roll call on the approval of the agenda.
Yes.
Board Member Flores. We're voting on the agenda.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Coran.
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you. Passes.
All right, we have our agenda. All right, then we'll move on to item 4A, which is the approval of the minutes from the regular ASCMV board meeting held on July 27th, 2023. Is there a motion and a second for approval?
So moved. Corin.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilor Corn. I will second the motion. Is there any input changes to the meeting minutes? All right. Not hearing or seeing any, so then we'll call for roll call on the meeting minutes of July 27th, 2023.
Board Member Macias.
Yes.
Board Member Flores.
Abstained, I wasn't present.
Thank you. Board Member Coran.
Yes.
Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
Passes.
All right, the meeting minutes are approved. All right, we'll move on to our reports and presentations. We'll start with our Coalition for Pets and People from presentation, which will be for Broken Promises. Ms. Gilbert.
Okay, good morning. And I'm Jean Gilbert, Secretary, Coalition for Pets and People on behalf of Broken Promises. Broken Promises Southwest is a nonprofit organization, and they were established here in Las Cruces in 2010. Excuse me. Broken Promises humanely addresses community cat overpopulation issues through TNR, trap, neuter, return. And they operate a small sanctuary for felines located on the East Mesa. Other animals at the sanctuary that you might be aware of are a small number of birds, pigeons, doves, hens, roosters. These are all animals that have special needs that make them unreleasable. All services at Broken Promises are provided free of charge, so the organization relies on donations as their primary source for funding. And of course, this slide here shows all their contact info. Okay, here is a picture of 3 cats that were recently TNR'd by Broken Promises, and they've TNR'd 122 cats since January 1st. And TNR is their primary service. This slide shows 3 different types of traps that are used by Broken Promises, which include a drop trap, and that's the one with the cat near the trap. And then there's the true catch trap, which uses a remote control for the door closure, and that's the one right under the blue cart there. And then the trap pictured right is their smallest kitten trap, and they were called upon to catch a domestic rat that was running loose in Las Cruces. And this was Tiny Toes Rat Rescue in Albuquerque that was aware of this rat, which they did catch and then transport to Tiny Toes Rescue. It should be noted that Joe Mealy, Broken Promises Director, instructs people on how to humanely trap and offers sessions on TNR. And I know previously last year I reported on a session that they offered that was really well attended on TNR. And I'd also like to note, last month when I presented on the coalition, I talked about that I myself have been a community cat manager, and Broken Promises, I'll tell you, has been instrumental in helping me trap and stabilize the population there. Broken Promises rescues cats from the shelter as their resources allow, and pictured here is Piper, who was born to a feral mom at the shelter and was later adopted by Broken Promises into a loving home. And this is pictured here at the PetSmart cattery that Broken Promises operates, and they've been doing that for many years now. Their cattery is run by authorized Broken Promise volunteers. And of course, they're always in need of good volunteers who want to help at the cattery or want to volunteer with them in other ways. Excuse me. Here is another adoption photo that was taken at PetSmart, and it's noteworthy because it is a double adoption. Broken Promises has adopted 14 felines year to date and about 350 total since they were established in 2010. It's expensive to run a rescue, as noted with this slide. Broken Promises has spent $20,000 so far this year in medical expenses, which include spay-neuter surgeries and related medical expenses for TNR, costs that are associated with their foster adoption program, which can include dentals, diagnostics, medications, and other expenses. And in this slide, I'd like to point out the styrofoam cooler that is situated to the back of the enclosure, of the cat enclosure here. This is a type of shelter that is used for feral and outdoor cats so they can stay warm in the winter. So they take a styrofoam cooler and, of course, cut a hole and put some insulation around the sides and on the top, and then inside, in this picture, you can see that there is straw. Doris Kitten was found in a trailer park, tangled in insulation, and had to have both her eyes removed. So this is an example of how Broken Promises spends their money on very pressing medical needs. Doris is also an example of the amazing following that Broken Promises has with their adopters and people that are members, because this photo was sent recently by Doris's family, and Doris is now 8 years old, and you'll see a picture of her there lounging on a chair in her loving home. This slide is another example of the great care that Broken Promises assumes when they accept felines into their program and the medical costs that they incur when doing so. This wonderful couple patiently waited a couple of months until they could finalize Kaz's adoption. Mhm. Excuse me. Okay. Broken Promises has volunteers who work in the cattery and do TNR and other work related to their programs and services. And Kitty Lana here was adopted 5 years ago from Broken Promises and belongs to a family who've been longtime volunteers with them. Pictured here are a couple of cats out of many dozens that are available for adoption through Broken Promises foster program, or through the cattery at PetSmart, or from their sanctuary. Okay, and that concludes the presentation on Broken Promises. If you want to thank you for your time and attention, and if you have any questions for me.
Board, County Manager Macias, please.
Ms. Gilbert, good morning.
Good morning.
You and I have known each other for a very long time.
We have.
I'm just wondering if, with all of the wonderful work that you're doing, can't we be a little bit more upbeat? The name Broken Promises, can't we change it to Promises Kept? You're doing such great work, and people are benefiting from difficult situations. I'm just saying it kind of tongue-in-cheek.
Right, right. Well, they
It seems
certainly.
that it's a more positive perspective would be.
Yeah, well,
think
Broken
really welcome.
Promises certainly does inspire people in this, here in Las Cruces, and though they're a very small organization, they are mighty.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Gilbert. Then we'll move on now to the city and county ACO reports. So, Ms. Halsey, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. I'm Brian Halsey. I'm the caseworker for Donana County Animal Control, and I'm here to present the county July report. Okay, so here's the Donana County Animal Control July 2023 report. For July, we had 252 reported stray animals. We ended up picking up 219 animals. For the month of July, we kind of had a reverse thing. We had way more stray dogs than cats picked up for once. We only had 52 stray cats picked up and 167 stray dogs. We ended up picking up 10 sick or injured animals, 2 of which were cats and 8 of them were dogs. And for the month of July, we had 10 dogs that were owner surrendered. This is our reported stray animal call for 4-year comparison. We were a little bit lower than we were for the month before, which is always a good thing, but we were still about where we are almost every year. This is our 4-year field return to owners. For the month of July, we had 24. And these are additional animals that we ended up picking up. We had 10 owner-surrendered dogs. We had 10 of the injured animals. We had 8 welfare holds. We had 1 shelter quarantine. We had 3 home quarantines. We had 2 bite quarantine dogs. And our live evidence that's currently being held is 4 at our facility. We didn't have any rabies submissions for the month of July. We had 6 diverted intakes, and then the 2 new parts of that slide for you guys that you had requested. We had 398 for general education, anything that ranged from microchipping to vaccinations to just general care maintenance for the animals, and we had 782 calls for the month of July. This is broken down by district for what we ended up picking up in District 1. We had 7 total, and they were all dogs. In District 2, we had 28, which comprised of 3 cats and 25 dogs. District 3 was our big one for the month of July. We had 28 cats and 42 dogs. In District 4, we had 5 cats and 30 dogs. In District 5, we had 4 cats and 26 dogs. In District 6, we had 0 cats and 9 dogs. In District 7, we had 12 cats and 28 dogs. Again, this is just the comparisons for the stray cats. And this is the one for the dogs. And our reasons for our release of ownership, we had one that the owner just wasn't able to keep the dog on the property. And since they weren't able to and weren't able to keep up with the ordinances, they went ahead and owner surrendered. We had 2 for vicious or livestock attacks. We had one that was sick. We had 2 that they just weren't able to keep care of the dogs, so they chose to owner surrender them. We had 3 that they were aggressive, and we had 1 that had behavior issues. We do have 1 extra slide for you guys for this month. We had our ACEs project, so this is what ended up happening at the end of it, since they did their follow-up in July. So out of 84 residences, we had 23 officers that went through the area for the follow-ups. That included on both projects. We had 111 total hours on the project. We had 31 initial warnings for citations for the first project. When they went to do the follow-up, they had 7 that were final written warnings or citations from the second project, which ended up being around a 77% compliance rate, which was pretty good. And for that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the presentation? Council Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. On the vicious animals, what happens to them?
So for the vicious animals, if their owner surrendered,
Yes.
that's the one you're talking about. So we end up taking those to the Animal Services Center, and then it's up to them on what they end up doing. Their owner surrenders to the shelter. So.
Oh, so I was thinking maybe they were,
Euthanized.
put to sleep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's up to the shelter. I don't know exactly what happened to those ones. We could actually talk to Clint and figure it out. I could see if I could provide the ASC number so we could see. I know if it's a court mandated thing on a vicious, it depends on what happens. Usually for vicious and or dangerous, they have 30 days to comply with the state statute and they get their dogs back. If they don't end up complying or just end up not getting the animals back, then by state court order, we end up euthanizing.
Oh, I see.
So it
But
just
if there's no
depends on what
court
happens.
order, it's
Yeah.
up to the center. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council Flores. Are there any other questions? I think the only thing that stuck out to me, it seemed like there was a large amount of dogs particularly, and I don't know if there was anything that we saw in particular that caused that, or if it just happened that those are the calls that we got.
Yeah, I tried to take a look at it because I knew that question was probably going to come up for this,
Yeah.
but I honestly, I couldn't find a real reason of why we had so many dogs for July.
Okay, I just didn't know that, or maybe there was litters that ended up, so, okay, thank you. All right. Supervisor Jimenez, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Wonderful.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. My name is Gino Jimenez. I'm the Animal Control Supervisor for the City of Las Cruces, and I will present to you our July numbers 2023.
And sorry, so if you mind holding on for a second, Supervisor Jimenez, I see Ms. Ward had her.
I just wanted to respond to the question on the increased number of animals. So because animal control is just about fully staffed, we have one more coming in to fill that position, you're gonna see an increase of animals because in the past, we didn't have a full staff, so therefore we didn't have as many boots on the ground to respond to calls or whatnot. So we do have more boots on the ground, so that might see an increase of animals that are getting picked up for various reasons.
Okay.
So you might see an increase for that for a while. And I'll comment a little bit more on that. Well, I'll actually just comment real quick, right, since we're on the subject right now. We did just have a training last week on Beyond the Scanner, So we do have new scanners for all the officers. They've all been trained on always trying to keep the animals out of the shelter and try to get them back to the owners as much as possible. You know, various ways and systems and things to get them out and back to the owner. And so we're trying to work with that and try to revise things to get them back by even updating and upgrading our equipment to allow for that. So that just happened too. So we're hoping to see an increase on those numbers as well once those start happening. But
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Warden. I appreciate you jogging my memory. I know this was discussed during the county commission meeting about you all being fully staffed or close to fully staffed, but I can see how it's almost like a double-edged sword where, you know, we're able to be more reactive to calls in the community, but then again, now we may see the numbers go up. And so I think the items that you talked about with the training hopefully will help with, you know, return to owners and keeping them out of the ASCMV. So appreciate the context. Gino, sorry about that.
No problem. I have to agree with Mary Lou, though. As we get more staff on, we're going to be able to respond to more calls. So that's the nature of the game. Very good. So for the month of July, we responded to 557 reported strays. Of those, 232 were GOA, meaning the officers did not have contact with that animal. We were able to apprehend 325. Of those, total 168 dogs were impounded and 95 cats, bringing that total to 263. We were successful in field RTOing 62 animals. Those were animals that never crossed the threshold of the Animal Service Center. We were unsuccessful in field RTOing 32, and those were animals that had some sort of identification. However, we weren't able to field RTO, and I'll go into that in a different slide. And that gives us a total of 94 identifiable stray animals. So here is our 3-year comparison chart. Again, 557 animals for the month, bringing us to a total of 3,563 for the year. Here's our 3-year field RTO rate. Again, 62 for the month of July, bringing us to a total of 315 for the year. And if we look at this chart and we look at the trends, we are already above our halfway through the year. We should exceed those numbers for 2022 and 2021, hopefully.
Can I, oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Councilor.
No, can I ask for us, and I know that every time we ask for some new random data thing, it creates extra work, so I acknowledge that, but I was wondering if we could potentially have this data as a percentage function of total calls?
Yes, ma'am, and that is actually in my
It's coming
one
up.
of my
Okay.
slides. Yes,
Sorry.
ma'am.
Yes, then never mind.
Actually, it's one of the peak performance report stats. Here is a slide for our community cat program. For the month of July, we responded to 66 cats and traps. Of those, the officers were able to release 5, bring us to a total of 468 cat calls for the year, and 91 of those were released. Reasons for owner surrendering animals: 7 for aggression, 4 for the owner could no longer care for, 3 were sick and injured dogs, 2 dogs that they could no longer afford, 3 dogs that bit the owner, 2 dogs that kept escaping, 2 the owner could not rehome them, 1 for behavioral issues, 1 for lack of space, 1 dog the owner could not handle. It was an 80-pound dog, 80-plus pound dog. 1 for the dog was loud and destructive. And finally, 1 dog for old. It was a euthanasia request. Next slide is the reasons we were unable to field RTO. 20, the officer had no contact with the registered owner, either by phone or at the residence. 1 was a Colorado address. 5, the chips were not registered. 4, The owner no longer owned those animals, and those chips were never updated. 2, there was no answer at the chip company, and finally, one owner was out of town, and they said they would just redeem their dog from the service center. And finally, here's your answer, Councilor Karan. These are our peak performance measures. Number 1, our first measure is 65% of reported stray animals are secured. The ACOs were able to secure 64.1% of all stray dogs animal calls for the month of July. Last month, I reported that we finally reached this measure at 65%. We're 0.9 low on this one. We're close, but we didn't meet that measure. Number 2 is 25% of stray animals were secured and they were field RTO'd in the field. ACOs, again, this goes to that question. We were able to secure 13.7% of those animals were field RTO'd. Measure number 3, 10% reduction of stray animal bites. We actually had a 38% increase from the time of July 1st to July 31st of 23, as compared to 2022. And measure number 4, 10% reduction in owner victim bites. We actually had a 25.4% increase in owner victim bites. Calls for the month, we had 1,277 calls for the month, bringing us to a total of 8,417 for the year. Highlights. We had 12 hours of presentations, and those were actually at our National Night Out event. And right now we have the officers training for NACA 1 and 2. I was able to secure scholarships for all my staff, so scheduling those officers to stay back into the office and take those trainings have accumulated up to 86 hours of training. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Gino. Councilor Flores, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Gino.
You're welcome.
Officer Jimenez, for your presentation. How do you field all those calls? I mean, that's a bunch.
It's a bunch. So, theoretically, we could be up in the 16,000 range for this year if we keep up with this trend. Our trend, and I say this almost every time, I'm saying it for the last couple of years, before COVID, we were up around 14,000, 15,000. I think this year, if we continue with this trend, we'll be up to the 16,000. It's hard because we're going call to call to call to call. It's the nature of the game. It's the nature of the beast. This is what we do. I don't want to be responding to this many calls. I would rather be doing some community outreach projects. I would rather be doing some educational projects, some impact projects. However, this is what we have to do primarily.
So then my question goes to, I guess it would be definitely a city issue as to funding in terms of creating more positions to be able to respond appropriately or to make a difference. I mean, you're getting all these calls, but there's no way that they can all be properly addressed or resolved. Is that the case, or am I just assuming or presuming that?
Chairman, Councilor Flores, I believe we're doing a good quality work.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, the numbers are always going to be there. And as the city grows, those calls for service are going to grow as well. So, of course, would more staffing be the answer? I don't know. We're handling the calls right now. But of course, with more staff, I could do some more outreach projects.
Well then, so you're getting the calls, and based on what you just said, it makes me think that you're getting calls that are not that you do not need to respond to or take action on.
Chair.
Or you're just getting calls saying, hi, how are you, Gino? Or-
There are very few of those, but yes, there are those. Well, the majority of our calls, again, like you saw, were stray calls. That comprises almost 50% of our call volume alone.
Oh, I see.
So the other care maintenance, telephone calls, questions about the ordinance, barking complaints, stuff like that still need to be responded to. However, the bites, vicious, those all take priority over those other calls. However, we do our best to answer those calls as quickly as possible
Okay,
as well.
thank you. Well, just let us know, and it'll probably go slowly, move slowly, but it seems like you need more staff. Thank you, Gino.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Flores.
You're
Ms. Ward?
welcome. You're welcome.
Gino, just real quick to clarify on those calls, are you also including follow-up calls in the calls that are coming that you've reported?
Chair and Mary Lou, yes, those
Okay.
follow-ups are included in that 1,200 calls. Yeah.
So that's the officer's initial plus their follow-ups on
Correct.
cases. So that might clarify things for Councilor Flores.
Yes, however, the follow-up calls are very small number. I think for this last month, it was like 42, 43.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Are there any other questions for Supervisor Jimenez? All right. Gino, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, then we'll move on to shelter statistics and activities.
Oh.
Ms. Thacker, good morning.
Good morning. Hope you are all well today. Before I begin my report, I would like to introduce the Animal Service Center newest employee with us. If I could have our community cat program manager join me at the podium. While she's coming up, this is Mayora Quinn. And she's joining us after a lengthy interview and hiring process. And she is coming to us from Albuquerque. She's excited. She's hitting the ground running. We have not publicized her hiring quite as much as we have other positions in the past, only because we're waiting for her to get a good understanding of what we need here in Las Cruces, and also to understand the program as we would like it to be, the center, and so on. So I would like to turn the time over to her so she can introduce herself.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here. Nice to meet everybody. So as he had mentioned, I came from Albuquerque, but actually I've only been in Albuquerque for 6 months, briefly as an animal control officer. But I applied for this position over a year ago, so I'm excited to be here. I accepted the job in Albuquerque. It got me here. I traveled from Virginia with 8 cats. So I am a crazy cat lady, but on the other hand too, seeing the perspective of citizens, even if you don't like cats, even though I've only been here briefly, I've already seen that there is an extreme need for this program. Even people that don't like cats, there's nuisance cats. It's not the cat's fault. It's not the citizens' fault. It's what happens when cats multiply. So, and I was impressed that, Las Cruces Animal Control, they handle a lot of cat calls. In Albuquerque, we handled cat calls that were sick, injured, sometimes nuisance, but we didn't actively trap unless there was an extreme need for it. So I'm impressed with the everybody working together. As far as I can tell already, I've already gotten my hands full. There's a lot of citizens that are they're doing it out of the goodness of their own heart, trying to trap and, spay and neuter and help the community with each other as well as the cats. So basically, yes, what we're doing is TNR programs. I scheduled 7 surgeries yesterday. It doesn't seem like much, but if you think about it, 7 cats that are no longer going to multiply, and 7 cats that are going to have litters and litters and litters that are no longer going to multiply. And I'm going back and following up with people that have called months ago, and the shelter has done their best to follow up. But again, there is a need for this position, and they've done their best to follow up, and now I'm stepping in the reins. So glad to be here.
Welcome, and we're excited, I know, to finally have the position filled. I know, again, I think as Clint has mentioned, and you've already mentioned too as well, you have your hands full, but you know, it's we need it in the community. So welcome to Las Cruces, Doña Ana County, and the ASCMV. Are there any comments, any other questions from the board? Okay.
All right, Mayora, I wish I was leaving with you, but they won't let me leave, so, but you can if you'd like. Yeah, she's out of here. Like, heck yeah. All right, as already stated, good morning. This report is for our July numbers. As you can see, though, currently at the center, as of yesterday, 474 animals there at the vicinity. We are trying to keep that number low because we have a smaller number of staff right now. So we need to keep it down to the number where we can adequately care for, we can mainly care for, and give them the proper care that these animals need. So yes, while we have had a lot more at that time, we also had more employees, and we're doing a better job of providing that care. So our intake numbers, just again, astronomical, 983, highest it's been in several years. 664 dogs came in, 310 cats. And you can see the comparisons there. It's a lot of animals come through. So how are they brought into the center? Well, you can see there, again, the biggest, and rightly so, is the strays by the animal control officers, 51%. The next largest is our strays by public coming in, and then owner surrenders, which is always a concern with the 16.5, and then the smaller numbers with return and welfare holds. Our returns that we had kind of had a high month. As you can see, total of dogs is 13 and cats is 3. Again, whenever we have individuals come in with the returns, first of all, we ask that you follow the suggestion of 3, and that's 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. 3 days to get the animal to get accustomed, 3 weeks to know the behavior or the routine of your house, and then 3 months to be able to fully adjust and give the animal a chance. When they say no, there's just too many issues, like you see here, allergies, behavior problems, etc., then we will be able to work with them, ask questions, give suggestions. But ultimately, if they want to turn the dog over, surrender the dog, this is what we do. We take the animal back. These are diverted intakes, 188, higher than last month. A divided intake is, like I said, those animals that are coming in. Our front staff meets them at the door and asks what's going on, what can we do. The biggest one is the strays that come in from the public. So public says, I found this dog, what should I do? And our staff says, well, you can go for a walk, you can put signs up, you can just ask around. Majority of animals are lost within a square mile of where they were found. So, they're owned in a square mile of where they're found. So it is imperative that these individuals try to find the owners before they bring the animal to us. So they'll get that information and then they'll go back and try to find it. And that's considered a diverted intake. So how do the animals leave the center? We had 19, almost 20% leave on adoptions. Reclaims, you see there, almost 14%. Rescued, they're doing a phenomenal job of 17% of the animals left the center. The biggest one you can see, though, is euthanasia. We euthanized 33.5% of the animals that came in July. So that leaves us with a 63.5% live release rate. Again, that number is so high because of the high numbers of animals coming in versus the low number that we're trying to keep at the center to provide that adequate food or that standard of care that we're committed to doing. Our transfers, again, you see there, again, made just a huge thank you to Action Program for Animals and all the other local animal rescues that take our animals. What they do for us, because they keep our costs down by taking locals so we don't have to send them out far away. we sure appreciate every single one of the ones that are local here that do so much for us. Oh, one thing I do want to show you is you see right here, Bernalillo County Animal Care. So they came down and we did a meeting here at our facility with other directors as well. And I gave them a tour of our new facility, and then they said, well, we want to see your current one. So we walk in, and the director's like, you have so many cats. And I go, yeah, do you want some? Out of a joke. Like, yeah, I do. I'm like, what? I thought you were just slammed with animals. And she says, yes, except for cats. Our cat room is currently pretty much empty. So, man, we worked out a deal right then. Kudos to our rescue coordinators, Amy and Liz. And we got a transport. I drove them up there. And simple, easy, 14 cats gone. So we're very grateful for them. With more to come. They said that they want to continue to do it. So our euthanasia reasons, again, the number one reason is medical space. So what that means is they were looked at because we were low on space or we needed the space, but also because they have medical issues that go along with that. Medical issues that we would have normally treated if we had the capacity. That is the number one reason for dogs, and also it looks like for cats as well. So the surgeries were 299. Year to date, we're over 2,000 surgeries. So what we have there is an incredible team working really hard, and we're grateful for them. Our volunteer program continues to flourish. A total of 693 hours. We have volunteers, y'all, going to everywhere from cleaning kennels and cat rooms to collecting food. I mean, it's just everywhere, and it's exploding. And we're so grateful to our volunteer coordinator, that Yoli, that what she does. The volunteers love her. She has good response time to requests for information and email. She's at almost all of the events, touting our flag. So we appreciate her for what she does. She did tell me, though, that the total number of volunteers might be decreasing because we purge the system every so often of volunteers that haven't been active in the last whatever her time frame is. So she is going to be doing that this month. It's been a couple months since she's done it. For some reason, a lot of people like to apply as volunteers. They'll go through the tour, and they might show up for one thing, or they might not even show up at all, and we never see them again. What I would like to do, if they would, is I'd love to get some feedback, telling us why. Was it the environment? Was it what they were doing? And so we're working with Yoli to get that extra information. Send them a questionnaire, find out, maybe just a link in an email, anything they can really do. Hey, we haven't seen you for a while. Can you tell us, choose a reason why, type of thing, so we can make some changes. Yoli has also, we went to the Best Friends National Conference a couple weeks ago, and there's a big player in the animal industry called Maddie's Fund. I don't know if you've heard of them before, and they do a lot of different things for organizations. One of them is review the volunteer program. So she signed up to have volunteer program kind of in a way audited or just, reviewed so you can get tips and things to do better. If you recall, we did do something similar with a university. I believe it was Florida University several years ago with another volunteer coordinator, and we got some excellent tips for that one. So we're always looking for opportunities to learn. Our total visitors was up to 1,655 for July of 2023. Our website views were one of the highest, it looks like it's been in quite a while, 39,000. July was a busy month. We had a lot of animals. We're pushing a lot of different things on Facebook. It continues to be a great way to get information out to individuals that are pro-animal, like are responsible pet owners. We're still looking at a good media venue to get to individuals that don't already have their animals sterilized or walk their dogs on a leash. So we're working with our media department, you probably heard our new ad that's on the radio about Mrs. McFluffyface is an advocate for spay and neuter. It's a great ad. I suggest that you keep your ears open for that one. Our Facebook views, 12,800. Again, continues to be a great resource for Facebook. So our upcoming events, Farmers Market on the Saturday on September 2nd. PetSmart will be there on September 9th. And the brewery we're going to be at on 28th. Those are always very popular as well. So we look forward to being out. Again, every weekend we're out, sometimes 2 places at once. Animals will be available. We'll have staff there answering questions and any information that is needed. And Shiloh and Angel are waiting to get adopted. These are our animals of the week. And I stand for any questions we have.
Thank you, Clint. Are there any questions? All right. We're a quiet bunch today. Just wondering, when is the next vaccination event and chipping event at the Field of Dreams?
October 15th.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to secure sponsors for the event, because we like to get microchip sponsored so we can announce free sponsors, also for vaccines. So we're reaching out to different organizations for that. If anybody's in the sound of my voice and would like to sponsor some money, usually we like to keep it, like in the 100 range for microchips at a time, so easier to count, but we would love to hear from other organizations.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I knew we were having one coming up. I also hear that there's a rumor of a possible dog wash that'll be participating in the I guess, well, not associated with the ASCMV. There'll be some volunteers there in the area doing dog wash. So I'll wait till next month to talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
Put in my own personal plug there. So, all right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, then we'll move on to committee reports, and we'll start with the Finance Committee. Ms. Bencomo. Good morning. And by the way, I should say it's nice to see you out walking and getting around.
Slowly. Thank you so much. Good morning. Yes, so we met as a Finance Committee. Of course, we are still monthly reviewing the financials, but we're on a quarterly schedule to bring that to the board, so we'll be bringing that to you all with the October meeting for the first quarter of the fiscal year. With respect to the financials for the month, though, Finance reported that revenues were at 20% of our budget because we front-end load the revenue coming in from the city and the county at 22%. So it was right around where we expected revenues to be. Expenditures, all other expenditures besides insurance were below the budget parameter at 8%. Insurance is another expense that gets front-end loaded, so that was at 11% for the first month of the fiscal year. So the first month always looks a little funny with respect to revenues and some of the expenditures, but by and large, there were no unexpected line items or issues with the budget. And again, we'll be coming forward in October with the detailed financials for the board, but we'll continue to monitor those on a monthly basis at the committee level. Also, at this committee meeting, we reviewed some discussion items related to the upcoming class and comp study that the Animal Service Center is undertaking. There's an expectation that there might be some adjustments to the salaries. We're going to be monitoring the actual to budget for these line items so that we can make the determination as to whether we need a budget amendment later on in the fiscal year. But for right now, we're monitoring and, of course, awaiting guidance from that study, most particularly for the vacant veterinarian position, I believe, and then any other associated increases that might need to be made for equity or other reasons. So that's something we're going to be monitoring on that committee and, of course, bringing to the board as appropriate. The last thing that we discussed at that meeting were the draft changes to the JPA and MOU, which we will be presenting to you today in more detail. But that covered the discussion at the Finance Committee for this month. If there are any questions?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Councilor Flores, I apologize. If you don't mind catching the question on the microphone, too.
I just
Thank
want to
you.
know when the next meeting is, Ms. Bencomo.
Yes, so I believe that the Finance Committee meets the week before the Animal Service Center meeting, so it's typically on that Thursday before. I was just looking to see if it's, yes, it's on the 21st
Oh, wow.
of September at, looks like 2:30 PM.
Great. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flores. Thank you, Mrs. Bencomo.
Welcome.
All right, if there are no other questions for the Finance Committee, I'll move on to updates from the Executive Committee. I know it was a very brief meeting that Clint and I had discussing today's agenda, what we anticipated. I think really and I might have to lean on Clint a little bit on this one, is, there was some discussion about the cat cages that had come in that were defective or not to spec. And so there was an opportunity that I guess number one, these are, we're going to be getting the corrected items as per spec, so that's a good thing. But the other thing we discussed was there's an opportunity for us to possibly purchase the non-conforming cat cages that we might be able to do some things with. So I don't know if Clint, if you want to kind of elaborate on it, or if I'm going into the facilities update a little too early, but.
I think you did a fantastic job. It's basically, we look like we can purchase these at a significant discount, and they're individual, they're not just one big bank, so that's nice, and it's $60,000 is the quote that they gave us. It sounds like a lot of money, but it is about 25% off, but we're getting that finalized and like to move forward with it.
Okay. And I don't know if we had any discussions with during the Finance Committee about possibly, so I know, and we kind of had a high-level discussion about how we might be able to look at it from the budget, how we might be able to plan it in there, because I think this was, as Clint and I had discussed, and, I'll leave it, when we have further discussion with the board, but at least the idea is that these cat cages might give us some flexibility at the ASCMV, particularly if they're at a significant discount. It might be worth something that we could potentially look at and figure out if it's something that would fit within the budget. So, sorry, Mrs. Bencomo.
That's right, if I may. So I guess I would have some questions about the total associated expenditures, if that is just for the cages. Are there any facility retrofits that would be required with respect to the utilization of the cages? Then would there be any additional expenditures further on down the line related to the use of these non-conforming cages?
So the answer is no, there's no changes, no retrofitting. They're individual cages that we could even put on wheels if we wanted to and move them around. And I don't see any future expenses that would be associated with the kennel specifically.
And what would the timing be for the expenditure, potentially?
As soon as, I don't know exactly for that. It would be this fiscal year. I mean, it would be within the next probably 3 months, I would say. But we do have some grant money that has been changed that we can use for general support.
Right. Mhm.
So that's kind of the one that we were looking at and how we would make the purchases with that.
And I think, sorry, Ms. Bencomo, if you don't mind, and I was just going to say, I think one of the discussions that Clint and I had was the possibility of, utilizing the current budget and then kind of seeing where we're at during, at the mid-year. But obviously, I want to make sure that the Finance Committee is aware of it, so that is in the back of your mind, so that we're not, we don't have some expenditures that are coming out of left field there. So.
Understood. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do believe that we also discussed the additional flexibility that we have with some of the grants and the possibility of utilizing some of those expenditures. Early on in the fiscal year, of course, we're going to be tracking the budget with respect to that actual to budget parameter, looking at those vacant positions, the time it's taking to fill, the potential for utilizing those funds. So that's why I wanted to know what the timing was. If the expenditure is early in the year, then we typically be tracking and then evaluating potential impacts for right around the mid-year, as to whether or not there needed to be any adjustments, because there may not be.
No, very good. And that's, I think, so I know Clint was going to try to, so I just want to make sure and bring it up so that we're all aware. But I did, you know, my personal opinion was I thought it might be a really good opportunity if the cages gave him flexibility, especially like as we talked, how the mobility of them might allow them to be able to place cages where they needed them. And so it might be a good opportunity to take advantage of the offer from the vendor. So.
Yeah, and once things get more solidified, we'll discuss it in the finance committee meeting as well.
Very good.
Thanks.
And I think that was about all I had in terms of my notes. It was a very, like I said, a very quick meeting for the executive committee. So then we'll have the facilities committee. I don't know if there's anyone. I know Mayor Pro Tem is not here, so sorry, Clint.
I'm part of the committee, so it's just fine. We talked about several things in the facility committee. We talked about the new kennels at the center, how they have been completed, they are installed, and we're ready to go. That's on the inside. On the outside of the kennels, they still do not have tops on the outside, and so we're getting a quote to get that done. Those were value engineered out of the project. And I honestly do not remember or don't recall, and I haven't seen any documentation that, you know, that was sent to me and I would approved it. But regardless, we're getting that completed and getting a quote for it. We talked about the community cap program manager and how that's being started. We talked about the cement project, and I do have an update on that. We, as of I believe the beginning of the week, we have a quote from James, and they're the ones that's going to be doing it. We're going to be utilizing money from, again, that $150,000 grant that we moved over. I'm going to be supplying $80,000 from that, and then there's some city fund or some funds left over from the center that are going to go towards that project as well. We're looking at 2 to 3 weeks before it can get started. With the cement, and we're not gonna pour the entire cement like from pod to pod. It's going to be, they're gonna be smaller rectangles that just fit the get acquainted rectangle fence area. It's gonna be, and then they're gonna do crusher fines around the edges. I'm not excited about it. We have the same problem with diseases, but it gets us completed with a cement bottom and the get acquainteds. So. And then in further years, we'll be able to fill those areas in with cement as we go. So that is the update for that. The fire alarm did go off at the new center. We know that the chain of phone calls works because I got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning and jumped up and drove to the center. And there was a crew there cleaning the air conditioning ducts areas, and it caused the dust to settle on the alarms, and the alarms went off, and the fire department responded, and it was a fun morning. So we know that's all working as well. That's all I have to report.
Thank you, Clint. Are there any questions? Councilor
Yes,
Flores.
I have a question. So what is it you're not happy about, Clint?
My original request was to have the entire area just one big cement slab. That means that if an animal goes to the bathroom anywhere, we can spray it off and scrub it no matter where it's at. But the plan now is to have some areas around the get acquainted cement slabs that are just rock. And I can't clean dirt and rock. I can't
Well,
sanitize
why
it.
wasn't that done initially? Just,
It originally was. It originally was slated, and then it got value engineered out to do just rocks, just a crusher fine rock.
but that
And
doesn't
I
work.
said, I can't do that. I can't have dogs on that. And so then the way to work around it or to meet in the middle was to do the cement slabs with the get acquainted on those slabs. But they don't go from pod to pod.
Well,
So if
it-
your board is more than welcome to come out and see, and you can.
Yeah, I'd
see
like
what
to
I'm
go
talking
out
about.
there and look at it. Are you going to be around this morning?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll drop by.
Well, I'm
Thank-
here this morning, but later on I'll be
No,
there.
you go there and I'll go there right now. No.
Perfect.
Thank you, Clint.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flores. Are there any other questions for Clint? All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Then we're moving on to agenda item 6A, which is under our discussion items. It'll be an update on the new JPA and the new MOU between the City of Las Cruces and the ASCMV.
Good morning. So, wanted to give you an update on review and discussion about updates to the JPA and essentially the creation of a memorandum of understanding for fiscal agent services between the center and the city. Our current joint powers agreement dates from 2012. So many things have changed during that time period. The ownership of the property has changed. Previously, the city of Albuquerque had an interest in the property, and that has been removed. Of course, there's a new building and structures that have been added to the site, and the fiscal agent services that are outlined in the JPA are not updated. There have been some changes there along with responsibilities. So for all these reasons, and also just because it's been quite some time since the JPA was executed, it's a good time to come back to the agreement, make sure that it still addresses the needs of the parties involved, and with that, the review that has been underway for quite some time, actually it predates me, has yielded quite a few recommendations for changes, and we're going to go through some of those this morning. First and foremost, in my mind, there's a recommendation for a structural change in the JPA. We would like to remove the fiscal agent responsibilities from the JPA and create an MOU. This follows a template that we've used for South Central Solid Waste, JPA and MOU. The JPA is approved by the city, the county, and the state Department of Finance and Administration. An MOU would only need to be approved by the Animal Services Center and the city by resolution. Therefore, it could be more easily updated if the responsibilities of the city and the center changed with respect to the services that are being provided. And so that allows a little bit more flexibility for those particular services. So what we've done with the JPA is as draft changes, removed any language that pertains to fiscal agent responsibilities and brought that out into the MOU, again, that's structured very similarly to what we have by with the South Central Solid Waste Authority. That MOU was just adopted, I believe it was September of 2022, so fairly recently. One of the other recommended changes in the JPA is with respect to the board membership. Currently, there are 6 voting members stipulated in the JPA, 3 city either elected officials or staff, 3 county elected officials or staff, and there are 2 ex officio or non-voting members, which are the city manager, county manager, or their designees. In the draft changes, there's a recommendation for 8 voting members for the board. 1 elected official from the city and the county, from each of those bodies. 1 city manager or designee, county manager or designee, and then a total of 4 public officials, or public appointees, I should say, appointed 2 from the city and 2 from the county. There's quite a bit of changes related to just clarifying language in the JPA. Some under the real and personal property section. I mentioned earlier that City of Albuquerque is no longer a party to the ownership of the land on which the Animal Service Center sits, so removed quite a bit of that reference. Our city clerk reviewed the JPA and recommended the inclusion of some language regarding Open Meetings Act to just make it very clear that we're structuring our meetings in compliance with Open Meetings Act. previously in the JPA, there was different language for the situation under which a board member could be removed, if the board member was from the county or if the board member was from the city. And so in the proposed language changes, we have just one statement for any board member about the circumstances under which they could be removed. We clarified the language that defines the budgetary reserve and also the budget development process. Additional changes were the addition of some term limits for the board. A maximum of two-year terms could be served. I think previously there was just language that said that there could be renewals for the term of the board members without a limitation. The meetings, recommended changes were to have quarterly meetings instead of monthly meetings, and therefore the attendance threshold was raised to 50% from 25% of meetings for the board members. We added the duties, rights, and authority of the center to just indicate what the center is providing to the community. This is similar to some language in the South Central Solid Waste JPA that just defines the services provided. And then City Legal Department, in their review of the JPA, recommended adding language to stipulate periodic review and renewal of the JPA to be every 5 years. We've gone quite a bit of time right now between the last JPA and this review, so I think the recommendation was just to keep that fresh and applicable to all the parties. And then I mentioned the memorandum of understanding. Currently, we don't have an associated MOU with the JPA for fiscal agent services. Those are outlined in the JPA, but again, the recommendation is to create an MOU. So we had all of the service providers from the city weigh in and list all the services to be provided. And then, of course, Animal Service Center reviewed those to make sure that they were in agreement with the services to be provided. So finance, HR, IT, risk, and fleet all have outlined services to be provided in the draft MOU. We also have the duties of the center and compensation for services to be based upon an annual cost allocation study that the city already undergoes, and we utilize that to establish the cost for our other JPA entities, including MRVDA and South Central Solid Waste Authority, so we would be in alignment with that for the center. The current JPA has language about compensation that set a specific dollar amount back in 2012, and then an increase based on inflation, I believe, but it didn't have any relationship back to the actual services being provided. So the cost allocation study that we undergo every year really starts with an agreement of what services are being provided and are needed by the entity, and then what are the costs of those associated services. And again, it's renewed every year, so it would be something that would be in the fall, take place in the fall in advance of the budget development that we typically do in the spring of every year. The next steps for updating the JPA and establishing the MOU would be, of course, today at this work session, where we'd love to have board input on the documents that were provided to you. City and county legal review would need to take place based on any changes or additions to the documents. City and county would need to approve as the governing bodies any changes to the JPA and MOU. And then, of course, there would be state approval required for the JPA ultimately as we renew that document as well. And so with that, I'll stand for any questions along with our Animal Service Center Director, Clint Thacker, and board member Macias, who was part of the review and proposed changes for the two documents.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Bencomo. So I'll go Councilor Corn, and then we'll go Councilor Flores. So,
Sure.
Councilor Corn, please.
I just want to thank you all for the work. I know that we started this last year, and I appreciate you all continuing through and carrying a lot of the inputs that were in those initial conversations into things, especially related to public participation on the board, and then also I would argue the reduction in the number of meetings is correlated with that, because we're asking folks to volunteer their time, and so I think I appreciate your thoughtfulness in approaching that, as well as the structure that mirrors other organizations. To me, we should sort of have a predictable, understandable relationship, and something that we can work on each year, that it doesn't require state approval. And so I don't want us to end up in a situation where we're 12 years out from the last revision and having to make enormous changes, or functioning under an agreement that we don't actually use for what it's used for. So I just want to thank you for your ongoing work on this. I know it's been a bear. I know that last year we had a lot of conversations about this as well. So, and I do believe that the public being represented on the board is a really significant and important component of this. So thank you for including that. So.
Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bencomo. So who are the people who have been restructuring all this? Is it 2, 3, 4, 5 people? Who? You, Clint? Mr. Macias?
Right, and my predecessor, the Assistant City Manager, Eric Enriquez, I know was involved as well in the review. Of course, our associated legal departments have reviewed, and then
excuse me, what department has?
Legal.
Legal has already reviewed it?
Yes, they reviewed proposed changes and made some recommendations as well. I mentioned our city clerk, Christine Rivera, reviewed and made the recommendations for inclusion of some language related to the Open Meetings Act. And then I'm thinking about who else may have had input. Yes, of course, sorry. Mary Lou Ward, our other ex officio board member. And we have had input as well, I believe, from Assistant County Manager Deb Weir. Go ahead.
And that's correct, Gino. And who is the other officer that is affiliated?
Lieutenant Wiedela.
Yes, she as well.
Oh, well, I think I do have some concerns, and I don't know what the role is for the current board. I agree with the idea, because really these are just ideas right now, that there be public input. Representation on the board. I do have, and I agree, I mean, we have to do a different JPA just because the city of Albuquerque doesn't own some of that land, and that changes a lot. And the review of the JPA has long, it's a long time coming, so I'm grateful for that, and thank you, all of you who have worked on it. I don't like the idea that there'd only be one person from each governmental agency, from the municipal, from the city, and from the county. One elected official, one city manager, one county manager. Yeah, we only have one, one of those. I think that to have four public members and only 2 elected officials, no, I wouldn't be able to support that at all, and it isn't because the public isn't important, but it's because elected officials are very important, because we're the ones that are held accountable if we do not comply with the rules and regulations of the JPA, especially. Whatever we decide internally as an organization, we have to deal with that. But the JPA is something else, and I don't know. I would like to have what I would like to request, Mr. Chair and fellow board members, is a workshop on this. I'd like to really talk about it, and maybe I missed a meeting where it was discussed. I don't think so. Yeah. So
Board Member Flores, do you have,
yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Something like that, yeah.
do you have a recommendation?
Oh, at
for
this
what-
point? No.
Yes,
I would
because
like to, I'd like
that's
to
input.
brainstorm. And, because, you know, this is my first impression. And I mean, we've talked for years and years, we've talked about the JPA having to be revisited, you know, when David Dollahan was here, and because things have changed, and now especially because Albuquerque is no longer the landlord. So, yeah, I mean, at this point, I would refrain from making any concrete recommendations, but I would like to request a work session where we fully discuss this, and I would like to have legal represented as well. I mean, this is a big change, and I don't know, change, I guess, you know, something like this is you know, big time. So, what do you think, Mr.
And
Chair?
Can I just clarify, the work session that you're requesting would only be on discussion related to the board membership structure?
It would be on the entire JPA proposal. I mean, and with all due respect, I mean, I know how much work goes into this. I mean, been there, done that. You know, and I don't like the term limits on representation on the board either, and that has a lot to do with the history and understanding, you know, what has happened. I mean, if you change every 2 years, you know, there's something about, you know, the history being institutionalized and carried by, board term limits, 2-year terms.
Two 2-year terms.
2 2-year terms.
That would be a 4-year.
Well,
term.
assuming that the person would be reappointed. So I think there's just, and again, I'm saying this with all the respect that you deserve, and this is not to in any way slam any of this, even though that's what it sounds like. But yeah, I'd really, so this is just right now a presentation to let us know what you've come up with.
And to get input as well.
And to get input. So this is the input session. I think that there are, who's missing from the board? Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem Gandara, Commissioner Sheljo Hernandez, and I think that's
it.
That's it.
Yeah, and I would like a session where we would, you know, I think that Mayor Pro Tem Gandara has been on the board and really understands a lot of the machinations, a lot of the things not machinations, but all the intricacies, excuse me, the intricacies of this board. So I think that without, I think that it has to be revisited, and I think that the, you know, a lot of the substantive stuff, I mean, some of the structural stuff is very questionable to me. And then we really need to review the relationship between the city and the county and the respective duties and obligations therein. So that's my say on that, and I hope we can have a work session on it. Thank you.
Okay, so I just
Thank
want to
you,
make
Mr.
sure
Chair.
that I capture that. So primarily it is the board structure and the term limits that is a concern, and you would like to have further discussion on the JPA
And then the
and
substantive, that structural, you're absolutely correct about that. But there's also the substantive aspect as to the rights and responsibilities of the two parties, of the county and the city. And it'll have to be done in a way that, I know that the JPA that was worked on, that was approved finally in 2012, went through some changes there were some things I think that came back. I wasn't here at the time. I wasn't even born then, but but I believe there was some changes that the state sent back, and because I have some copies and all that stuff. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bencoma.
Thank you, Councilor Flores. I'll let County Manager Macias go, and then I was going to chime in, I know, on your request, and I have a few questions of maybe what we can figure out. Go ahead, Mr. Macias.
Again, I just want to kind of encourage, this is a kind of a first sharing of this information. So we certainly can have a continued dialogue, but let me just share my perspective in terms of potential even compromises or resolutions, since this is a recommendation. We did start out, and it has been quite some time, and it was, I believe at the time, Assistant County Manager Enriquez, who was the first city representative, him, Mr. Thacker, others that were giving input into this process. But part of the goal, let me share with you where I think we run into some difficulties. It's always been my opinion, and no one else has to share it, but that our elected officials are stretched out among many different obligations, many different committees, have to spend time. Some have more time than others. I'm sure the reason that we're missing two of our elected officials is because they're probably out there at the Solid Waste Authority meeting, because they sit on those boards as well. You always have that kind of potential conflict. I always want to assure you, though, although we have these boards, ultimately it's the City Council and the County Commission as a whole that are making decisions. I mean, this board gives input, it suggests directions, but the commitment of funding, the commitment of personnel, that ultimately comes from the City Council and the County Commission as a whole, not necessarily the board, this board, or the other boards that exist. You can see that historically the county has only had 2 elected officials. I shouldn't be here. But I'm here because we don't have another county commissioner willing to assume the responsibility. And I'm not saying that that's a city-related issue, but certainly it reflects on the number and the time commitments that elected officials have. This is one committee. We have at least 13 different committees that elected officials are sitting on. And so the thought was, why not open it up to have public representatives? You have so many individuals, good individuals in this community, far more informed of animal security or safety issues than perhaps even some of the board members. I'll acknowledge that there's people in the community. I'll look at Ms. Gilbert. She knows far more than I do about the intricacies of animal care and the dynamics that are occurring in the community. So part of it was to enhance that role, to give that voice greater opportunity, to have it participate in the decision-making related to the actions of the city and the county. So if one were to say, look, I really don't think that we should diminish the role of the elected officials so quickly that there could be a transition, well then remove the city manager and the city and the county manager and just put 2 more, either a commissioner or another counselor on it. Some of the options that we can talk about are relatively simple from my perspective. If there is a concern that it's too much of a transition from elected to public or appointed members, well then let's find the balance if that's what the majority of this board really believes. I just think that there's a need for ongoing dialogue that can occur even here at these meetings. We spend a lot of time with hearing reports. I think that's important, but at some point we should use portions of these meetings to have more of the policy discussion, so that in a meeting or two, we're ready then to make presentations to both the county commission and the city council for changes. Do we impose any kind of term limit? Well, let's have that discussion, because really where it applies to is really members of the public, because the city council and county commission at some point will transition anyway. There's limits on county commissioners. They can only run for 2 4-year terms. So that there's already inherent limitations in terms of who should be serving on committees, and it is helpful to be able to have, you know, some transition so that people have a broader understanding of all of the issues that we're dealing with in the community. So, but if that's too structured or too limited, because part of what we were thinking is that for those in the community, it'd be good to transition. There's so many strong advocates representing so many different interests within the community. So give somebody a 4-year opportunity potentially. And then let someone else get in terms of the more public appointment. So a transition there, I think, would be healthy as well. Yes, healthy as well. But some of these issues, they're just a little bit of a discussion, and there's potential compromises that could be arrived at relatively easy if some feel that the transition is too dynamic. I would suggest that we not diminish the proposed role of enhancing the public's participation in the process. No, and I know that I'm not hearing that. That's why I'm suggesting the logical transition for having more elected officials is just to remove the city and the county manager or their designee and return them to their role as ex officio members. I think you've seen great value, and I want to compliment Barbara. I think you see that there is a value in having some of our higher management individuals participating in the process, because they really help to maintain a degree of continuity in the discussions, in bringing a finality to the discussions at a management or advisory level, and then bringing matters forward to the commission, being resources for the entire advisory board. That's why we felt that it was important to have management level and encourage as high a management level as possible to be participating in this process. So again, I don't know that an individual work session is absolutely necessary. I think that now that we've given a little bit of exposure and a little bit of input, certainly the group, the work group can go back and say, you know, how do we address maybe some of the concerns, or how do we give another line of proposals that our elected officials can choose between. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Macias. I don't disagree or necessarily agree with everything you said. You set forth a good basis for a robust discussion. I think that my concern about any board that the city is involved with, whether it's one of our internal boards, like our, any board, there's liability. And so when there's liability, who's going to pick up the tab? Is it going to be the public? Is there going to be a pot to take from? I don't know. I'm just looking at all those issues that could arise. The JPA is between the city and the county. I suppose it's okay, according to legal and the city clerk, to have the public involved as a board member. And if there's a lawsuit, are we going to be sued individually or municipal or county? I mean, you know, I guess I just think of all those things. And I'm just being cautious. And people think that we don't need a robust discussion on this. What can I say? But I think we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flores. I just want to, and Councilor Corn, if you don't mind, if I chime in, and then I'll come back to you. You know, I think, well, I'm not opposed to having a, you know, work session for us to discuss specifically the JPA. I think if my recommendation would be that we get a little bit more finalized and kind of where I think the board that's currently meeting has final recommendations. And then based off of kind of the initial input, we can have a work session and kind of dig into it a little bit more. I think just so that way, you know, we're a little closer to more of the details that are already kind of ironed out or approved by legal before we, I think, you know, I think there's some thought behind where the final recommendations were to the board. But I think, in my mind, I believe I'm in support of kind of what's being proposed here, mainly because while I know we all in our capacity serve the public, I think in particular having people on the board that have experience, that have interactions with the ASCMV, hearing their voice and having recommendations from them directly would be an asset to the ASCMV as well as the county commission and the city council. Because I think at the end, the ASCMV board, while they're approving kind of the direction of the ASCMV, I think at the end of the day, really the people that set the policy and the funding is still the city council and county commission. So if the ASCMV board recommend something, it would still have to come back to the respective boards to make approvals in the end, to increase a budget, to change policies, and so on. So I think it's important that we do have the community and find a way to have the community on this board to be able to have a more active role and set that, because I think you know, we see every day or not every day, but in their meetings during the reports from Clint that without those members in the public, the rescues, the partners that we have, the actions of the ASCMV and everything we do in the community doesn't work without them. And I think that's why it's an important. But like I said, I think it's an important point. I think if I'm open to having a work session, I think, like I said, if we can have like kind of final recommendations, and then maybe in the meantime, while we continue to get updates like we are here, you know, we can provide some feedback and then kind of get to that point. I don't know,
If
Ms.
I may.
Bencomo, if you might have a
Yes.
suggestion.
And certainly we have the reviewing members here, but I would characterize what's before you today as a very advanced state of recommendations to you. Again, to the extent that we've already had them reviewed by legal as well as multiple parties. I would think that if you wanted to have another session, that you'd be able to take this documentation and utilize it as the basis for that discussion and additional input. But of course, I would defer to the other reviewing parties of the board too, but I think we're well advanced in the process of reviewing and making recommendations from that body that undertook the review.
Is the intent, or I guess was the intent or timeline for us to approve maybe during the September ASCMV meeting, or do we have any specific timeline on when we were looking to approve it before it goes to the city council and the commission?
Chair Sanchez, we do not have a specific timeline. Again, this was the first step to bring forward to you everything that had been reviewed and recommended at this point after much discussion. But there's no specific timeline as far as when it will come to council and to the commission. Therefore, if additional discussion is warranted or what you would like to have, we can certainly fit that in. But I would utilize the documents that we brought before you today as the basis for that discussion.
I just wanted to speak to this idea of the timeline. Our board membership will change as of January 1st, so I would urge us to, whatever we do, make sure that it's done by that time so that we can, when we do that board membership change that will have to happen, that it will be available for that new year, since there will be new folks elected within the city. So that, I guess I would say, I was curious about the timeline as well, and I support the changes as they are, but I was also in on conversations early on as when I was chair last year, so I know that these things were under discussion, so I've had a lot more time to think about it. So I would say whatever we could do to give more sort of space to address some of the perhaps the issues that Councilor Flores has brought up, if there is a place where we can compromise that's still honoring the sort of work that's already been done, I would ask that we do it quickly and make sure that by January 1st, we're able to implement all the changes. That would be my ask.
Thank you, Councilor Corn. County Manager Macias, did you have anything to add? I see your microphone on. Oh, no problem. Okay. I mean, I said I would be open if we wanted to try to have something before the September ASCMV meeting, or do it in September maybe look to try to get it finalized and approved by October. I just think that whatever we do, I'd like to make sure that if we have a work session, we give the board, the committee and the respective members of it to have time to make any other changes from that input of the work session, so that. But I think if we should, I would like to target October, just in case if for any reason we need to push it, we still have some time after that. And I think, and as Councilor Corn brings up, I think that point is well taken. Yeah, and making sure we get it done before the end of the year.
Chair Sanchez, just to clarify, that October timeframe you're saying would be what we would shoot for a finalized document that would be approved by council, commission, and go to the state?
I think and this, correct me if I'm wrong, at least my thought was if we can have it approved by, I don't know, do we have to approve it as a board here before, as a recommendation to, okay.
I say thank you so much, Chair Sanchez. Sorry, I'm nodding and just
yeah, I just want to make sure
verbally,
know that.
But yes, I believe the assumption would be that this board would review and make a recommendation to the county commission, the city council, for adoption before it would proceed in the proper process for acceptance.
Okay. I mean, would the October timeframe still give us enough time to go to our respective, to the council and the commission for approval?
Well, again, my suggestion was not to in any way diminish a very robust discussion of this. I was only suggesting that we could do it at the next regular meeting if we prioritized it as an item, and that there would be some action perhaps taken at that time, which is the latter part of September. And then it would be before the city council and the county commission during the month of October, giving enough time then to send it up to for ratification at the state level. And let me suggest to you, I think that would be relatively fast-paced if we would meet a certain time frame to get things on the agenda by the Board of Finance, but I would not see any kind of issues, any legal issues related to, in fact, the State Board of Finance has a number of public appointees to it. So it's no different here, whether it's the county commission or city council that appoints a public member, or it's the governor or the State Board of Finance. Your liability insurance policies covers anybody that is acting in an official capacity under the sanction of either body. So I don't see that as an issue that would come forward, and I think that we would meet the timeline that Councilor Curran is recommending, which I think is a very good recommendation. So I would say, if we need to educate, if we need to talk individually, if we need to have those discussions, we come back at the meeting in September ready to take some final action on the documents.
Okay. I mean, I'd say then let's go, plan on putting it on the ASCMV board meeting for next, what I'm showing right now is the next meeting will be September 28th. That gives us some time, but if we wanted to have even just a work session to kind of review and have input, I'm looking, I don't know, maybe the week of Labor Day, so that'd be sometime the week of September 5th through the 8th, or maybe even the week of September 11th, and that would still give the committee even a couple of weeks to be able to come back and before coming to the September 28th ASCMV meeting. And at least at that point, they'll have incorporated input and, hopefully at that point, that'll help have us at a point. I think we'll have just, if there's any changes, it'd be very, very minor at that point. But, I don't know what the board or Ms. Bencoma, what your thought would be on that.
So I think that if the Animal Service Center Board is going to adopt by resolution a recommendation to the council and to the commission, then it would be advantageous to have a work session prior to the September 28th, is that what you said, board meeting, because then that would allow for a resolution to be crafted to go to the board at the September 28th meeting.
Okay, that sounds good. Councilor Flores, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Ms. Bencomo. Mr. Macias, so you said that that board members such as this, the JPA, does the JPA delineate, does it set forth the liability shield for the members, or is that just a given? Is it somewhere in the Constitution or something, or where is that?
No, it's basically state law and the policies
State
that
law.
both city and the county have.
Okay.
Basically, anybody, all of your employees, all of your elected officials, all of the decision-making on any body, if there is to be some kind of litigation that would encompass, it covers everybody on this board, whether they're public members appointed because they went through a legal process to be a member of the board and a decision-making member.
Great.
So our general liability policies are
Are
already
covered.
cover. Oh, absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Macias, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flores. Thank you, Mr. Macias. So, I guess then, based off of that suggestion, I think what I'll ask is, I don't know if Clint or Mrs. Bencomo, if we can maybe coordinate with the members on availability one of those 2 weeks, like I said, the week of September 4th or the 11th, whatever might work best, then we can just have a plan on trying to get a work session for just specifically focused on the JPA and in preparation for that September 28th meeting.
Everybody will be available on the 4th. Nobody's working that day.
No. I'll be out of town, but okay. No, and so like I said, if we can have that, at least we'll go in that direction and roll with it. All right. Thank you, Ms. Bencomo, for the updates. Okay, now we're on to, under the approvals or action item section of our agenda, we have Resolution 2023-11. It's to amend the contract of the ASCMV Executive Director. This would be in response to the evaluation that we had for Mr. Thacker. If you do notice in the board packet that the resolution that's in there for consideration right now does not have a salary value, only because I think when we were discussing at the time, I was just waiting on feedback for what his current salary was, and then to be able to calculate the recommended 5% that the board had recommended based off of of his evaluation. So what the value that or at least the information that I have right now is that his current salary is $120,702.40. A 5% increase would be an annual increase of $6,035.12, which would bring a new value or his new annual salary to $126,737.52. So so what I will do is I'll write it here into the resolution, and as such, what I would do is I'll ask for a motion to approve Resolution 2023-11 to amend the contract of the ASCMV Executive Director, Mr. Clint Thacker, to reflect an annual salary in the amount of $126,737.52.
So moved, Corin.
So
Second by Flores.
we have a motion by Councilor Corrin, a second by Councilor Flores. Are there any questions on the motion and the resolution? Mr. Macias? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no comments or questions, then I'll ask for a roll call, please.
Board Member Macias?
Yes.
Board Member Flores?
Yes.
Board Member Corran?
Yes.
Chair Sanchez?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, then we're on to public input portion of our meeting. Are there any members of the public that would like to provide public input? I'd like to welcome you up. All right. Ms. Gilbert, go ahead and come out.
I noticed there wasn't, excuse me, there was an opportunity for public input on the presentations by Animal Control and by Clint. So I have a couple of questions, probably for Gino, and if that's okay.
Sure, please.
Okay. In Gino's report, he mentioned that there were, I'm going to state two questions, Gino, before I ask for your answers. 66 cats in traps for the month of July, and only 5 were released. And I'm wondering why that is such a small amount. And I'm hoping that it's not because the cats on site, as they are viewed or caught, didn't have ear tips, because they could still be, microchipped or have identification. So I'd like to know why that's such a small number. I find it very, very disturbing. We should be able to release a lot more cats than that. The other one is on the peak performances. I think I noticed the word secured, and that kind of confused me because 25%, and I can't remember if this is dogs or cats, are returned to the owner. I'm sure that would be dog. Well, I don't know. Anyway, secured. Well, to me, if they're already RTO'd, that means they are secured. I mean, they've been caught, they've been returned to the owner. So I'm very confused. The word secured was used elsewhere too. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert. Gino, if you don't mind, I would appreciate it. And I apologize, Ms. Gilbert, for not having public input on that portion of the meeting.
Chairman, to answer the questions right there, secured to us means that the animal control officer secured it, not that the citizen was secured or the animal was secured. It's by the ACO. Second of all, the 5 that were released, the community cats that were released, were because there were only 5 that met the requirements to be a community cat, meaning they were ear tipped, microchipped, vaccinated, and or spayed or neutered.
Okay.
That's why that number was so low. There was only 5 that met the requirement. They were, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Gino. Appreciate it. Is there any other public input? All right. Not seeing or hearing any, so we'll move on to chair and board comments. Are there any comments from the board at this time? Ms. Ward.
Thank you, Chair. This is just an update, basically. Recently, and I just wanted to give an update because I know this is televised, and Animal Control for Doña County has recently encountered a very viral, a case that went viral, I would say nationally viral case of a dog that was pretty malnourished. We are still getting calls to this day for it. And so I just wanted to give an update for that case. So in case anybody's watching this and is curious about what is going on with the dogs or how the dogs are doing, the dog in question and the second dog that we picked up the next day have both been taken off the property of the owner. Both dogs are in the custody of Callista Animal Hospital. They actually came in our custody. They've been owner released to us. We in turn have turned ownership over to Callista Animal Hospital, where they are graciously taking care of the animal and giving them all the veterinary care that they could have to try and save their life. So they are currently at their facility every day, you know, getting stronger and stronger every day. The owner has been held accountable for that. I won't go into the details of the charges or anything like that. But so if anybody is watching and just wants to know an update, we're still getting calls every day saying, go get that dog, it's still on the property. It's no longer on that property, it hasn't been. It has been taken off that property and is in the care and custody in a veterinary facility. So I would like to give an update on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Are there any other board comments? All right. Well, then we're on to our last item of business, which is our adjournment. So if I can get a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved, Corin.
I have a motion by Councilor Corrin.
Second.
A second by County Manager Macias. All right, then, if there are no objections, then we'll call this meeting adjourned at 10:52 a.m. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you all back here September 28th for the next board meeting, and we will also be providing notice on any work session that we'll be having regarding the JPA. So, thank you all.